This is the largest social, economic, and political experiment in world history. Never have we seen such a change to society, the economy, and politics, certainly in such a short period of time, and certainly not with every country in the world undertaking this experiment. We do know from history when we experiment in the way the governments are with economics, we generally have quite negative outcomes when interest rates are pushed this low, when you start printing this amount of money, when you start giving such large sums of money away, essentially just bailouts directly into the economy. Generally, it has negative outcomes. When countries are locked down in this manner, you generally have an encroachment of big government, of the police state. That's generally a very negative outcome. So we should ask ourselves, is the cure worse than the disease? Let's take a look at this first one. This is from The Spectator. It's an article by Fraser Nelson. What is the cost of the lockdown? Chris Whitty, the chief medical officer, has always argued that COVID-19 will take lives in two ways, directly and indirectly. Directly, 7,978 so far, with up to 20,000 expected in total. But indirectly, in my Daily Telegraph column today, I report that initial models drawn up inside the government suggest a figure of 150,000 avoidable deaths caused by the lockdown, far greater than the revised toll expected from COVID-19. The cause of the deaths will be a mixture: downgrading NHS services, less cancer care, mental health treatment cut, and people avoiding the NHS. Visits to A&E were down by a third last month. Whitty is also concerned about parents not vaccinating kids, which could threaten herd immunity for other diseases. 150,000 figure is produced by a model. Like all models, its finding are the creation of its inputs. Now, 150,000 seems a lot to me, right? It seems a lot to me, but even if we say, well, there's obviously some truth in this, we know fewer people are going into A&E. I've heard stories now of people not taking their kids to A&E when they get a fever, which apparently the government haven't been clear on this. If a child has a fever, they should go to A&E because for childhood diseases, a very, very high temperature is a lot more fatal for children than it is for adults. So there's certainly been children dying that haven't gone to hospital, that have called 111, maybe got the wrong advice, and lives have been lost. Will it be as high as 150,000? I don't know, but even say it's 20,000 and the expected lives lost from COVID-19 at 20,000, you're still only netting out at, equal, right? Some have died from coronavirus, some have died from trying to stop coronavirus and, died in other ways. So is it really worth shutting down everything in society just to have a net outcome of 0 lives saved? I don't know. And that's only assuming that the lives lost and the lives gained are going to be the same. Probably more importantly than that is the economic fallout, because potentially many, many more lives could potentially die from that. So there's an article from the Telegraph. Ministers brace for the economy to slump by more than 14% in the next 3 months. Ministers are bracing for the economy to slump by more than 14% in the next 3 months, sparking concerns that tens of thousands of Britons may die prematurely from the worst recession in history. I'm glad at least mainstream media is starting to use the terms like worst recession in history, because we've been calling out for a long time. Like at the start of March, we were saying this when Deutsche Bank was saying it was going to be 0.5% growth in the UK. There are growing fears in Whitehall that the impact of rapidly rising unemployment and deteriorating mental health from the lockdown may ultimately prove more lethal to the health of the country than coronavirus. Now, yeah, I mean, this kind of makes sense. Like as the economy gets worse, people die. It's as simple as that. This is why I'm pro-free market. I'm pro-capitalism, because capitalism, free markets are the quickest, easiest way to grow living standards, not only in the UK, not only in the West, but across the entire world. If you have free markets, as the economy grows, as living standards rise, lives are saved. People have better access to food, better access to medicine, better quality of medicine, right? They can heat their homes. So, I mean, we're only arguing here about what could happen in the UK. Potentially tens of thousands of people die, in a very, very bad economic scenario. But what about the rest of the world? In places like Africa, like in Southeast Asia, they're relying on economic growth to lift themselves out of poverty. A large recession, a large depression is going to be bad for the UK, but think how bad it will be for people in developing nations. It's going to be terrible. Ultimately, you're looking at millions and millions of lives potentially lost as this depression, recession develops. I mean, a recession was going to happen anyway, but everything the government seems to be doing at the moment seems to be making it worse than it necessarily needs to be. The final point is more the social aspects to look at. This is from The Independent. Coronavirus. UK police forces to set up random checkpoints to limit drivers' movements. Police forces across the UK have set up checkpoints to stop vehicles and ask drivers if their journey is essential during the coronavirus lockdown. And we also have the Telegraph going, police under fire over new checks on non-essential shopping despite Home Secretary's opposition. Police have been accused of overzealous enforcement of the lockdown, but roads, beaches and beauty spots were remarkably quiet for Easter. So people seem to be complying. What's amazing in the UK is not so much what the police are doing, but the fact that the general public are actually staying at home. They don't actually need any police input, really. This is what I've been arguing about. If you tell people the truth, if you let people know why they should be doing something, they'll probably do it off their own back. Now, the Home Secretary, the government even coming out and saying, look, this is overzealous, you shouldn't be doing this. The real problem we have here is the police are essentially enforcing guidelines. I mean, there is legislation behind it, backing it ultimately, but the police are pretty much just working off guidelines. It's pretty much up to each police force to interpret these rules and regulations as they see fit, and then try and relay that onto officers. So you end up with this draconian, that the police are going to generally push too far, right? It's just human nature. If you're the sort of person that wants to become a police officer, you're the sort of person that probably likes enforcing rules. It's just human nature. If you put that kind of people into that kind of job, when they get the opportunity to enforce laws, they're probably going to do it overzealously. So the guidelines in which they're acting is quite worrying, because this is how police states operate. This isn't how we operate in the UK. The police should operate to clearly define legislation and then enforce those rules. This vague guidelines is quite dangerous. It's a slow slip towards tyranny, a slow slip towards a police state. Now, we can argue, well, this will all blow over when coronavirus goes away. I mean, historically, when there's a big power shift from the people to the government, from the people to the police, you may get some of the powers back, you may get some of your liberties back, but generally history shows that generally doesn't happen. So we should really be asking ourselves now, is the cure worse than the disease? I mean, potentially we're already looking at maybe more lives being lost. I mean, these are all models, right? We can only just say, well, this is a model. I mean, pretty much all the coronavirus models up until now have been wrong. So there's nothing to say this 150,000 people dying indirectly from coronavirus will be true. But we should really be walking around with our eyes open at this point. I mean, this is the largest social, economic and political experiment in history. Generally, when we've enacted these sort of laws through human history, especially the economic stuff and the big government stuff, it generally ends in disaster. So we should be aware of that. We should be aware of what we're dealing with. I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions on this one. Do you think this model is correct? Do you think more people will potentially die indirectly from coronavirus? I mean, I've got an allotment, right? I just finished on this one. I'm actually looking a little bit browner than I was yesterday. So we've got an allotment. I was down there yesterday filling up wheelbarrows with horse manure, walking it around. That just seems to be what you do. An allotment, it's more my girlfriend's thing. But yeah, anyway. I was out there, shirt off, getting so much sun inside me. I felt so good after that. You know, getting that vitamin D is so important. It's probably one of the reasons why people with darker skin are actually a lot more likely to die of coronavirus, especially in northern climates like Europe and North America, because it's so easy to be deficient of vitamin D now. But so many people are just like, the police, if you just lie down in a park, will come and like fine you or tell you to move on. It's so important to get things like vitamin D in you and keep your mental health resilient. So we're quite lucky we got the allotment. We're quite lucky that we can get out there. Hopefully it's going to be another sunny day and top up with vitamin D and be healthy. But that's it. But a lot of people aren't, especially if you live in a block of flats in the central London and you're banned from your local park. How are you going to get your vitamin D? Ultimately, not getting vitamin D could compromise your immune system and actually lead to, unnecessary deaths. But that's up to the police, isn't it? It's not for me to say. That's up to your local police department to enforce as they see fit. Jason from Liberty Bunkers signing off, and I'll see you in the next video.